I've had dealings with many of you over the course of my earlier lives as professor, dean, and chancellor. But for the past 5 years, I have assumed a different role, chair of the Institute of Politics at the University of Pittsburgh. The IOP, as it often is called, currently is celebrating a 30-year legacy of distinctive contributions to the progress of southwestern Pennsylvania, and one person more than any other deserves credit for starting and shaping the Institute. The Institute's founding director, Moe Coleman, who passed away earlier this year, was one of Pittsburgh's all-time leaders of impact and all-around great people. As you can see from the title of his memoirs on the screen, Moe devoted his life to the search for common ground. In fact, in that book, Moe said this about his career: "Repeatedly, I chose to submerge my own strong political and social views in order to play a credible, neutral, mediating role, because in most cases I saw that role going unfilled. I believe that the role for such mediating influences is even greater today, as our political environment has become increasingly polarized." The IOP can really be seen as the institutional embodiment of that view. Our mission is to serve as a neutral, nonpartisan forum for elected officials and other civic leaders to address policy issues of importance to the region. We're committed to civil discussion and to evidence-based decision-making, qualities that sometimes seem to be in short supply these days. At certain stages of our work, we deliberately choose to fly beneath the radar, providing an off-the-record forum where people can feel free to exchange what might not be fully developed ideas without the fear of some kind of political punishment as a result. This is one of those sessions, off the record, no media invited, so I invite you right from the start to engage freely with questions and comments and off-the-record conversations as the program advances. Our criminal justice work now spans 4.5 years, and the person who bears most of the credit or the blame for getting us started down this path is Fred Tiemann, our former United States Attorney, former president of the Buell Foundation, and now the holder of the Foundation's Henry Buell Jr. Chair for Civic Leadership. In the spring of 2015, Fred spoke to the county's Criminal Justice Advisory Board to dramatically oversimplify his presentation. He really was generally focusing on a disconnect between the fact that crime rates in Allegheny County had been steadily decreasing, but the population of the Allegheny County Jail had not. After Fred shared that talk with the Institute of Politics, we decided to devote a good portion of our annual elected officials retreat the following September to that topic. Then that summer, strong bipartisan support for incarceration reform almost seemed to erupt, reflecting the now more clearly recognized consequences of the widespread implementation of get tough sentencing practices. Those consequences were described in that summer, the summer of 2015, in a cover story in The Economist, which labeled America the jailhouse nation and reported that per head, the incarceration rate in the land of the free had risen sevenfold since the 1970s and was then 5 times Britain's, 9 times Germany's, and 14 times Japan's. The article also made clear that it had not always been that way. Instead, in 1970, America's state and federal jails and prisons combined held just under 200,000 inmates, but by the time the article was written, that number had grown to 2.3 million. A cover story in the New York Times Magazine entitled "The Bail Trap" reported that every year thousands of innocent people are sent to jail only because they cannot pull together $500. It went on to describe how when people are sent to jail only because they cannot afford to post bail, they are put at risk of losing their jobs, custody of their children, even their lives, before they have been found guilty of anything. That same summer, President Obama did something no sitting American president had ever done when he visited a federal prison. According to coverage in the New York Times, once inside its walls, this was one of the president's first views of prison life. They opened the door to cell 123, and President Obama stared inside. In a space of 9 feet by 10 feet, he saw 3 bunks, a toilet with no seat, a night table with books, a small sink, prison clothes on a hook, some metal cabinets, and the life he might have had. Again, quoting from the New York Times, after this visit, the president said, "We have a tendency sometimes to almost take for granted or think it's normal that so many young people are locked up. It's not normal," he continued. "It's not what happens in other countries. What is normal is teenagers doing stupid things. What is normal is young people making mistakes." Still, he made a clear distinction between young people making mistakes and criminals guilty of crimes like murder, rape, and assault. "There are people who need to be in prison," he said, "and I don't have any tolerance for violent criminals. We need to keep our communities safe." Today, there is a widely shared belief, one that otherwise bridges the very deep political divide, that America's practice of relying so heavily on incarceration has been a major mistake. These practices have often had a devastating impact on individuals, families, and communities. Beyond that, because of disparities in the populations most directly affected, these practices have fueled questions about fundamental fairness. They also have contributed to the financial stresses felt at every level of government. It was not surprising then that bipartisan support for incarceration reform began to emerge nationally. It was also not surprising that County Executive Rich Fitzgerald asked the Institute of Politics to assemble a task force to examine incarceration policies and practices in Allegheny County and to determine what could be done to make our current system of criminal justice fairer and less costly without compromising public safety. So the IOP, Fred and I have been at it ever since, Working with the county executive, we assembled a 40-person task force. It included a wide cross-section of leaders from within the criminal justice system. It included academics with expertise in such directly relevant areas as criminology, law, and psychiatry. It also included civic leaders with a strong interest but no particular expertise who might be the source of fresh thinking about the topic. The task force met for the better part of a year before releasing its report, which was built around a series of basic principles and is available either online or on the publications table outside this room. That report closes with a series of recommendations. The first three were directed to the county executive himself, who moved quickly to implement each of them. The first of those recommendations was that the county executive appoint a progress panel to monitor the progress being made or not being made in the implementation of the recommendations and to issue public reports. The county commissioner appointed that panel, which is co-chaired by Fred Tiemann and me. The second recommendation was that the county executive employ a criminal justice coordinator to help penetrate existing silos within the system. Here, the county executive exceeded our wildest expectations by recruiting a person of unusual stature. Ed Mulvey, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh, who directs our law and psychiatry program and has held many prestigious national positions reflecting his familiarity with the juvenile and criminal justice systems. The third recommendation was that the county build on its considerable technology strengths to deliver timely data and analysis to manage the overall system and monitor key performance metrics, including racial disparities. This is a never-ending process, but under the determined leadership of Aaron Dalton, we have made real progress on that recommendation too. The Progress Panel itself now already has released 2 reports, which also are available on our website or on the publications table. In its 2018 report, the panel recommended or identified some limited but important areas of progress. For example, the Office of the Public Defender had begun to provide representation to some defendants at their preliminary arraignments where initial release or detain decisions are made. The positive impacts of that test program appeared to be significant, and the program now has been expanded. The 2018 Progress Panel report concluded in the following way. It seems appropriate that the county executive who launched this initiative would take the lead with respect to implementing its recommendations. However, equally determined efforts by other leaders will be essential to achieving even higher levels of progress. The panel's more recently released 2019 report largely focuses on the infusion of new resources to support system improvement efforts, noting that in the past year, the county was selected to be a part of the MacArthur Foundation's Safety and Justice Challenge Network and received a $2 million grant to build on its criminal justice efforts. The Heinz Endowments made a 3-year, $10 million commitment to criminal justice reform including an initial grant of $350,000 to the Institute of Politics, both to support the work of the Progress Panel and to support programs like this one. Meanwhile, the Buell Foundation has continued to invest heavily in its One Northside initiative, which is building a neighborhood partnership involving the City of Pittsburgh Police, the Housing Authority, and the Northside community. Consistent with the priorities advanced in the Task Force and Progress Panel reports, Allegheny County has committed to achieving two main goals through its participation in the MacArthur Challenge. First, reducing the population of the county jail by 20% by September of 2020, which is not too many months away. And second, reducing racial and ethnic disparities throughout the system. The county's efforts to achieve these goals will be boosted by the hiring of new staff members by the public defender, by the district attorney, and by the courts through the application of MacArthur Foundation funding. The infusion of resources into these key areas also underscores the key message delivered in that 2018 progress report that we do need leaders from within the criminal justice system who are committed to this process of appointment, as we agreed we would be in accepting the MacArthur Foundation grant. One very important product of the Heinz Endowments grant is this program. We would not be here today without that support, and so I do want to acknowledge both Carmen Anderson and Stan Thompson from the endowments who are here today. I also want to acknowledge Patrick Griffin from the MacArthur Foundation and Diana Bucco from the Buell Foundation, who are also here today. We have assembled an all-star team of speakers for this program. That group is New York City-centric, which is understandable given the trailblazing work that is being done there. By virtue of a city council vote taken about a month or so ago, Rikers Island Correctional Facility, almost certainly the country's best-known jail, if only because you all watched Law and Order, and you heard Detective Briscoe say to his partner when dealing with a recalcitrant defendant, well, we'll toss him into Rikers for 3 days and see whether he's ready to talk then. Well, Rikers Island Correctional Facility is going to be closed. It will be replaced by 4 much smaller jails positioned in 4 of the 5 New York City boroughs. This action was taken on the recommendation of the Independent Commission on Criminal Justice and Incarceration Reform, which I was told at dinner last night I should just call the Lippman Commission, and Chief Judge Lippman, its chair, and other members of that commission are here with us today. As amazing as that closure decision may seem, there is important context to share. New York City already has brought down its jail population from 22,000 in 1991 to 11,000 in 2014 to 7,000 in 2019. These reductions have occurred because as the city's crime rate went down, the jail population went down with it, something that has not happened here in Allegheny County. And when the 4 new jails are built, that population the capacity will shrink further to about 3,300. So if you're looking for dramatic progress, New York City is the direction to look. Now, for them to achieve everything in their plan is going to take hard work. And even though nothing so dramatic is in the offing here in Allegheny County, we know after 4.5 years of effort that achieving our goals also is going to take work. But if we can reduce both the jail population and racial disparities, we will have gone a long way toward advancing the goal that is underscored in the Lippman Commission report, and that is ending the costly cycle of repeat offending. If we're able to make progress toward those goals, credit will have to be broadly shared. But it is clear that one person can claim a lion's share of that credit. And I refer to our recently re-elected 3-term county executive, Rich Fitzgerald. As I already have described, the county executive has been a driving force behind this criminal justice improvement agenda on every front. And he didn't just say, Mark and Fred, will you go do this? We meet with him regularly, not only to provide him with progress reports, but to seriously discuss substantive issues. We meet even more frequently with our outstanding county manager, Willie McCain, who was a part of the task force, and so he has been at it for 4.5 years as well, committed to advancing the cause. And what is the cause? You know, I can't express it any more simply than County Executive Fitzgerald did in his initial charging letter to us. Discover what can be done to make our existing system fairer and less costly without compromising public safety. I don't know anyone who can quarrel with that as a goal. I also don't know anyone who would turn down the opportunity to work with a leader like the county executive who is both principled and effective and is so deeply committed in everything that he does to the greater good. And so I ask you to join me in welcoming Rich Fitzgerald, our county executive.